Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Trish Secca, and I'm Senior Nutrition Program Manager at IFINS. We are happy to have you here today and to offer you this webinar focused on live microbe data and how to submit to the Global Branded Foods Product Database. For those of you that are new to IFINS, or the Institute for the Advancement of Food and Nutrition Sciences, we are a nonprofit organization that advances food and nutrition science for the benefit of public health by bringing together scientists from industry, government, and academia. Our core values are illustrated on this slide, including our commitment to scientific integrity and transparency. Before we get started, I'd like to cover how you may ask questions. This is the first format attendees may see. Starting at the top, you'll notice an orange arrow. This arrow allows you to expand or collapse the control window on your screen. When this window is expanded, you can type in your comments and questions. In fact, we encourage you to participate this way in the dialogue. The questions you type are only visible to the IFINS staff and not other attendees. Here is a second format that our online attendees may see on the screen. Again, we encourage you to submit questions at any time during the presentation. IFINS staff will ensure questions from the audience are addressed at the end of the webinar. The addition of live microbes to the Global Branded Foods Product Database was initiated by the IFINS Gut Microbiome Committee, which has the goal to advance the science required to substantiate dietary modulation of the gut microbiome in ways that are conducive to health. One of the focus areas of this committee is to build the evidence related to the relationship between live dietary microbe intake and health. To do this, dietary intake needs to be better understood. One way to do this is by documenting the amount of live microbes in branded foods by leveraging the USDA Global Branded Foods Product Database. It's important to note that the USDA Global Branded Foods Product Database is the result of a public-private partnership between USDA, GS1, One World Sync, Nielsen IQ Label Insight, the University of Maryland, and IFINS. Our program today features 3 speakers who will share information on the rationale and need for this data, how the data appears as part of USDA Food Data Central and Global Branded Foods, and finally, how manufacturers can share this data. We'll hear from all 3 presenters and then open up for questions and discussion for the remainder of the time. To lay the groundwork for today's webinar, we welcome our first speaker, Dr. Colin Hill, professor in the School of Microbiology at University College Cork, Ireland. Dr. Hill holds a PhD in molecular microbiology and is also a founding principal investigator in ACP Microbiome Ireland, a multidisciplinary research institute focusing on the role of gut microbiota in health and disease. He served as president of ISAPP, International Scientific Association for Prebiotics and Probiotics, from 2012 to 2015, and is currently part of the IFINS Live Dietary Microbes Subcommittee, which designed the data inputs that will be reviewed by USDA today. Dr. Hill will begin today by providing the scientific rationale for this focus on inclusion of live microbes in the diet. Dr. Hill, you can take it from here.
Hello everybody, my name is Colin Hill and I work at APC Microbiome Ireland at University College Cork in Ireland. And today I want to talk about live dietary microbes and the idea that we might need a recommended daily amount of live microbes in our diet. Let me start by placing this in context. We live in a microbial world, and there are 3 pieces of evidence here to back up that claim. In the first panel, you can see that microbes have been here on Earth for 3.5 billion years or so, while our entire evolutionary span only took place in the last 1 to 2 million years. So we evolved into a microbial world, a world in which every available surface is covered by microbes. And of course, in humans now evolving into that world, every exposed surface, internal and external, is exposed to microbes and is covered with microbes. The importance of these microbes is illustrated by the fact that mother's milk contains human milk oligosaccharides, or HMOs, a family of highly complex sugars which only microbes can digest. The baby derives no immediate benefit from these HMOs, but of course derives a benefit from the nurturing of a microbiome within the baby that will contribute to health. And the last panel is meant to just illustrate that as we evolved into this microbial world, we of course took advantage of existing molecules. Molecules, for example, brain chemicals like serotonin, acetylcholine, GABA, butyrate. These are all made by microbes, and we use those for signaling within the body. And so we can say in a way that microbes and us, we share the same language. And so we can speak to each other and communicate with each other. Now there's an observation that's been made by many people that over recent decades, there has been an increase in certain autoimmune and inflammatory diseases, these chronic non-infectious diseases. And this has happened at about the same time as we have had a decrease in exposure to microbes in our environment and our diet. Our environments are more hygienic and our food is more processed perhaps and doesn't contain as many live microbes. Now there are enormous benefits, of course, to eliminating lots of microbes from our diet and from our environment in terms of infection, but we're also probably losing something, losing this old contact, this expected contact with our microbes. And this has variously been termed the hygiene hypothesis or the old friends hypothesis, depending on your angle on that particular question. And so what we proposed in this paper that was published 3 years ago now was that perhaps these things are linked. Now, this is very much association rather than causality at this stage, but we can show that, for example, in the early human diet, we must have been exposed to extraordinary numbers of microbial molecules because there was very little processing of food and possibly less washing of food, and that the immune system and our enteric nervous systems would have adapted to expect large numbers of live microbes in our diet. And then the industrialized human diet, the modern human diet in the Western world, would have relatively low microbial numbers in highly processed food. And perhaps that leads to a low level of interaction with the immune system and diminished health status. And the solution to that may well be to reintroduce these microbes into our diet. This can be done through fermentation, for example, or through probiotic supplements, or whatever means, to try and reintroduce this daily quota of live microbes that will interact with the immune system and perhaps restore health. Again, speculation and associations rather than any causality here. But what we wanted to do was design a strategy by which we could begin to test this association. So this three-way association between our diet, the microbes in our diet, us, and our health. So we set out to test the hypothesis. What foods contain most microbes? Who consumes those microbe-rich foods? Can we find any evidence to support a link with health? And then, of course, other things like which confounding factors need to be considered. And at the end of all this process, should we be recommending that people should eat more microbes? And if so, which ones? So the bits in black I'm going to really talk about now. The bits in red are still somewhat for the future. So which foods contain most microbes and who consumes most of those? Now we know from the literature, from our understanding of food systems, that the foods that contain the most microbes would be probiotic supplements and of course fermented foods, foods with very high numbers of microbes that are needed to create these particular foods like cheeses and yogurts and pickled foods. Next down on the list would probably be fruit and uncooked vegetables where we eat microbes adventitious microbes that are present on these foods. We haven't added them deliberately, but they're present in high numbers. And finally, of course, we'd have the processed foods, which in many cases the microbes have been eliminated by heating or drying or acidification or salting, some method like that. So, who eats more of these microbe-rich foods, and where could we get this information? So we turn to the NHANES database. The NHANES database is the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. It examines a nationally representative sample of about 5,000 people in every cycle, and that builds up to tens of thousands then over a number of cycles. And it takes a detailed recording of health status, and it takes details on diet based on recall. So people are presented with a list of potential foods that they may have eaten, and they tell the surveyors which foods they have been eating. And this informs a lot of FDA decision making on dietary recommendations. So this is a really solid source of information. What we did in this paper that you see listed here, that was published last year, was people like Maria Marco, Mary Ellen Sanders, Bob Hutkins, and myself. We assigned each of the 9,388 food codes to a microbial category: low, medium, or high. And these are very broad categories, low being under 10 to the 4 CFU per gram or per mil of the food, medium being 10 to the 4 to 10 to the 7, and high being above 10 to the 7. And we did this in a kind of a round robin process, but you know, it is the opinion, I suppose, informed opinion of these 4 people. And what we found was that very few of the food codes fell into the medium, only 3%, and even fewer fell into the high microbial load category. So most of the foods that we eat, or most of the foods at least on the NHANES database, contain low numbers of microbes. Now, we then, of course, conducted the analysis, and this was primarily led by Victor Falgoni and Dan Tancredi, 2 statisticians. And I won't go through the data in detail, but the highlights of this research were that only about 20% of consumers eat these high microbes foods, these 1% of foods that contain high microbes. Now it goes up to about 2/3 when you include medium or high. And we found, of course, that most of these microbes come from fermented foods. This was all kind of predictable, but it was nice to be able to put numbers on this. Now, there are lots of caveats to this study, and I want you to see the original paper for the details. I'm only giving you a really high-level view of it now. There's another paper was published a few years back as well, which drew the same conclusion, essentially, that the typical American diet only provides about 10 to the 6 CFU, colony-forming units per day, but the recommended USDA diet plan, which is much more varied, of course, would provide 10 to the 9 CFU per day. So people are not getting the number of CFU that are recommended by the USDA, and certainly people are not getting exposed to many high microbe foods. So now that we'd established those kind of facts, were we able to find any evidence to support a link with health? So what we had to do then, of course, was go to the same NHANES database and pick out the health data and try and associate that with the food intake data. So as it says here, and again we relied on Victor and Dan, very important in this part of the analysis. What they did was they used regression analyses to assess that relationship between the consumption of food with live microbes with these physiological parameters. And this paper was literally only just published within the last week or so. It's only available online now, but it will be available fully in a very short time. And it's open access, so anyone can read it. And you see the list of authors there. I won't thank them all individually, but you can see the list of authors. So what did this paper find? Well, interestingly, it found that there were associations of intake of fermented foods with physiological parameters in adults across this almost 20-year period of the NHANES database, an N of nearly 50,000 people. And You can see them there for yourself. There's things like blood pressure, body mass index, HDL, cholesterol, insulin, triglyceride, waist circumference and weight, various levels of confidence in these statistical differences, but these were generally modest increases. I don't want to pretend or convince you that these are enormous impacts on health, but they are significant and they are improvements in health outcomes. Once again, I'd encourage you to read the paper for the full detail. Now, coincidentally, another group at the same time used the data that we had created, the assignment of the individual foods to their high, medium and low microbial loads, and they'd done somewhat similar assay, but they focused on cardiovascular disease. This is Han and Wang, and they published this paper in Nutrients late last year, and they showed a significant association between high levels of microbes and reduced stroke and heart attack in these groups. So that, of course, is a much more significant output than the physiological measures that we were looking at. So, to start to bring this to a conclusion, what can we say about live dietary microbes in health? Well, the foods that contain the most microbes are exactly as we'd expect, fermented foods. Who consumes those foods? Only 20% of US adults consume these very high microbe-rich foods. And is there any evidence to support a link between dietary microbes and health? And yes, I've shown you 2 studies so far. I've found an association, but I really want to stress the association. There are lots of confounding factors that need to be considered. I mean, the kinds of foods that are high in microbes are things like yogurt and cheese and fruit and vegetables, things that are already recognized as healthy foods and are high nutrient foods. So there's a lot of confounding factors here, and we need to really get in and try and pick apart the contribution of live dietary microbes. Should we recommend eating more microbes, and if so, which ones? We need more precise evidence. I don't think we're at a point yet where we can make confident recommendations on that topic. But of course, what would help that enormously is if we had better input data. If rather than us assigning foods literally from a list and doing it over a matter of hours or days to their high, medium or low microbe capacity, if we could actually get the people who make the food, the experts, the real experts, to give us information about the amounts and types of live microbes in foods, this would really allow us to address this hypothesis in a much more satisfying way. And so that's where the IAFNS Live Dietary Microbes Subcommittee has initiated the addition of live microbes fields to the USDA database. And we'd really encourage you to use those, and you'll see in the following presentations why we introduce this particular category, or why IAFNS introduced this particular category. I'll conclude there. Obviously, I'd like to acknowledge the role of ISAP, the Live Microbial Panel, and the IAFNS, Live Dietary Microbes Subcommittee. See the names listed there, ISAP and the IAFNS, for setting up this webinar, and you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Kyle is the lead on USDA's Food Data Central, an integrated data system that provides expanded nutrient profile data related to agricultural and experimental research. Kyle has a bachelor's in computer science and a master's in information management with a specialty in technology development and deployment. For over 13 years, Kyle has been involved in developing multiple food database applications. He previously worked at the University of Maryland in collaboration with the Food and Drug Administration to develop food data applications for food risk assessors. Kyle is now with the USDA ARS Beltsville Human Nutrition Research Center and leads Food Data Central's data collection efforts and manages future application developments. He is an active participant in the public-private partnership that works to expand the global branded foods product database, which is publicly available on USDA Food Data Central. Over to you, Kyle.
Great, thank you, Trish. I'd like to start today by taking a step back and talking about the database that houses branded foods. So the Global Branded Food Products Database that we're talking about today is located in USDA's Food Data Central, or FDC for short. Food Data Central is an integrated data system that provides expanded nutrient profile data and links related to agricultural and experimental research. And it can be accessed in the URL that you see attached onto this slide. It is a publicly accessible resource, and all of the data that is on FDC is free for use. You'll find on FDC there are 5 distinct data types. I want to give a quick definition of what you'll find, not only branded foods, but the other data sets within our system. Foundation foods are data and metadata on individual samples of commodity or commodity-derived minimally processed foods with insights into variability. Standard reference, legacy, is historic data on food components, including nutrients derived from analyses, calculations, and published literature. FNDDS, known as Food and Nutrient Database for Dietary Studies, includes data on nutrients and portion weights for foods and beverages reported in What We Eat in America in NHANES, the National Health and Nutrient Examination Survey that we just talked about in our previous presentation. Branded foods, which is data from labels of national and international brand foods collected by a public-private partnership that I will expand on. And experimental foods, which are data on food published in peer-reviewed journals and supported by or in collaboration with USDA. So now I will talk more about branded foods. And you saw this slide with Trish. And as mentioned, branded database is possible because of the USDA Global Branded Food Products Database public-private partnership. Each partner brings a different type of expertise to create, populate, and update the data set that is available on the USDA website. If you look through branded foods, you will find that for each branded item in the database contains values on each nutrient that was required on the US Nutrient Facts Panel. And manufacturers are encouraged to submit values for additional nutrients if they have them. Users of the database can view nutrient information per serving or standardized per 100 unit servings in grams or milliliters. We encourage manufacturers to submit nutrient values for both the serving size and for the per 100 unit serving, but USDA will calculate values per 100 unit if they are not provided. In addition to nutrient values, each entry in the branded foods database also contains the product's ingredient list, its G10 number, brand owner, product and description, food category, and date stamps associated with the current metadata changes to that product, as well as the market country that that food is marketed and sold. There are multiple ways that manufacturers can provide their data into the USDA database. Marshall will be going into more detail about these mechanisms, but let me ask the audience, do you know if your company's product data is available in the branded food products database? And if not, who is the right person to work on supplying your data that you might participate in this database? You should have them reach out to us. We would love to have your participation. It's a snapshot of the evolution of the branded database. It was originally launched in 2016 with 100,000 products, and since then has grown to include over 400,000 branded and private label products, with updates being made on a monthly basis. The partnership is active in ensuring data quality, expanding into global markets, and responding to research needs that are identified by scientific investigators and federal agencies, such as the Microbes that we'll be talking about today. And the impact of the branded database and the impact of industry providing label data is substantial. Various sectors of the research community, public health community, food industry, policy officials, and consumers utilize the branded food database in a variety of ways, including accessing ingredients use within product categories, establishing links between diet and chronic disease, informing dietary guidance and tracking software, and supporting federal programs and surveys used to inform food and nutrition assistance policy. The website itself has seen over 5 million users since its launch in 2019, and that's for the entire Food Data Central. We see about 150,000 users a month. About half of our traffic is international, 50% coming from within the US and 50% of our traffic coming from every other country. So now I wanted to show, if you do participate in this database and provide data, where you can find this information. So I've loaded up a product that we have today that has microbe data in it. And this is what you might find if you load up and pull up this product. But I want to highlight this tab of information right here called Other Information. And the Other Information tab is where you will find additional information on a product, and in this case, including microbe data. So let me zoom into the microbe data. And we provide our data within Food Data Central as the manufacturer provides it to us. So this, in this case, was provided through the Global Data Synchronization Network that Marshall will talk about. But this is the microbe code that was given to us, the method in determining the live microbe count, the unit of measure, and in this case, it says X_CFG. This is defined in the Global Data Synchronization Network as a unit of measure defined as colony forming units per gram, usually stylized as a CFU/G, and the minimum value the minimum value provided for that unit of measure. Another note here is if your product has multiple microbes, it is possible to submit multiple microbe codes and methods over, including values and units of measure to our database. And last, we'll be talking about the other interfaces in which users will be able to access the microbe data within the data system. The first is the Branded Foods database download. The download is provided in 2 open access file formats, comma delimited CSV and JavaScript object notation known as JSON. These files are generated every 6 months in April and October. So in our next generation, in April 2023, in a few months, will be the first opportunity you have to find live microbe data within our download files. But if you would like to get to data sooner, you can go to the application as I showed you before. But we also provide an application programming interface, also known as an API. The API gives direct access to Food Data Central's current data. It's usable by software developers and by statistical software, and it allows users to directly link into our database and pull data and search data live. That application is updated every time we update our data, and therefore if you go in today, you will find live microbe data. And to end here, here's some information if you are interested in contacting me. I would like to note that Food Data Central has a contact form at fdc.nal.usda.gov/contact.html. You'll also find the link in the top right navigation menu. I bring this up because if there's any opportunity that you would like to communicate with us or inform us, it's a great opportunity to go in and fill the form, and we triage the questions that you provide to us and make sure that your question gets forwarded to the correct expert or person responsible in answering your question in a timely manner. But you can always reach out to me directly at my email address, kylemckillop@usda.gov. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kyle. Next, we have Marshall Keener. Marshall is the Government Engagement Director for GS1 US. GS1 US is a member of GS1 Global, a not-for-profit information standards organization that facilitates industry collaboration to help improve supply chain visibility and efficiency through the use of GS1 standards. Marshall is responsible for collaborating with USDA government agencies and industry to determine how GS1 standards can support improved business and information processes, as well as enhance product and location information. He engages agency stakeholders as a trusted advisor, identifying challenges and opportunities to leverage GS1 global standards for shared value by government and industry. Marshall received his MBA in Strategic and Operations Management from Drexel University. and his BS in Environmental Studies and Policy from the University of Vermont. Over to you, Marshall.
Great, thank you, Trish, and thank you everyone for joining the webinar today. So for the next section, we're going to talk about how to submit data to the USDA Global Branded Food Product Database. And so going forward, you'll hear me reference the database as branded foods. So let's get started. So this slide was shown earlier by Kyle, and so what's really important here to understand is, what makes branded food so successful is that it leverages a couple different methods on how that's commonly used by industry today to share product information as well as nutrition data. So the two ways shown on the screen here are both trusted and secure methods, making and sharing product data with branded food seamless as possible. So the one method submitting data is utilizing the GS1 Global Data Synchronization Network, or GDSN, which is often supported by a certified GS1 data pool. So the GDSN option in the slide here is represented by One World Sync, one of the partners in the USDA public-private partnership as mentioned earlier. But that said, any data pool could be used for data submission. So the second method for data uploading is through scanning the product label flats. So the label flat scanning option represented here is by Nielsen IQ Label Insight, who's also another partner at the USDA public-private partnership. So any solution partner with label flat scanning technology can be used as well. But both methods will provide that data to the University of Maryland, who then aggregates, standardizes the data, and then provides it to USDA, who publishes it to the Branded Foods database. So let's start off talking about GDSN. So about GDSN. So it's the Global Data Synchronization Network, as I mentioned before, GDSN. It is the largest product data network in the world. So GDSN makes it possible for any company in any market to share high quality product information seamlessly with the help of GS1 GDSN certified data pool. So in the diagram here, the seller and buyer will each have their own GS1 certified data pool. The seller will work with the data pool to set up their product content and synchronize it with trading partners following GS1 standards. The buyer will then work with their own data pool to receive that product content. So how does the process work? So the process flow starts with the manufacturer preparing the data in the system to align with identified GS1 standards. So in this case, we'd be talking about the Global Trade Item Number, or GTIN, which is the product identifier. Other standards would also be like the Global Location Number, which is a location identifier. So then the manufacturer works with their GS1 GDSN certified data pool to upload their data to the GS1 Global Registry platform. The data recipients then subscribe to receive the manufacturer or supplier's items or party information via their chosen data pool. The synchronization allows for the item or party information to be automatically and continuously synchronized between the respective data pools. But what's important to note when you're looking at the USDA database, branded foods, is to publish the products branded foods, there is a specific implementation guide. So in this guide, it defines all the different required attributes, which is also known as a playlist. So the data submission in order for you to submit to branded foods. So USDA is an open target market subscription. So what that means is you don't need to ask for permission to publish. And so you can publish all your items and attributes directly to the database. Not all attributes listed in the implementation guide are required. So if you look at the minimum required column here, you'll see different letters like O, R. So R is required, O is optional, CR is conditionally required. And in the notes on the right-hand side, I'll kind of give you more details about what the different attributes are. But this guide can also be found, and we can share that after this webinar as well, so you can see what the full implementation guide looks like. So now to what we're talking about today, which is about the live microbe attribute. So to give you, and Kyle gave you a little sneak peek at it, but we'll show you a different view of what it would look like in the implementation guide. So here it's the new live microbe attribute. And things here to note would be the organism code and their min-max values for that. But the details about each one you'll see in the notes. But what's interesting to note here is the minimum required. So you'll see here we're talking about a lot of this is conditionally required. So at this point, this isn't a requirement, but this is at the manufacturer's discretion if they want to add this attribute. Or maybe the manufacturer or supplier is requested by another trading partner to provide that information. So, but that said, it's obviously available. All right. So the next screenshot, which we're going to show you here, is what that attribute looks like in a data management tool. So this is just an example. So each view might be a little bit different depending on the data pool that you use. But this is how it would usually be laid out in a data management tool, and this is how it would be shared to the GDSN. If you notice, it's very similar to the information that was captured in the implementation guide. So now data submission to the GDSN. So once you've reviewed the playlist and you've populated all the needed product data that you needed for that, you'll then have to choose to where you want to publish it. So in this screenshot here, compliments of One World Sync, this is their pre-production system, and it shows how you would start to go through the process of publishing. So here, what's highlighted is you'll see there's a number and it says USDA. And what that is that is a GS1 global location number. And this is telling you I would like to publish this to the USDA's branded foods. So in this highlighted one here, all you would do is you would just click add and then go to next. And at that point, for data submission, you would then determine the date you'd like to publish and then determine if it's initial load or if it's a new item. So initial load means that you previously published this item before in the past and you're updating it. New means that it's actually obviously a new product. So that kind of shows you how easy it is to upload and do products through the GDSN. Now we're going to explain the second example, which we talked about before, which is, or the second option, excuse me, is the label flat. So the next few screenshots is the label flat scanning examples, complements of Nielsen IQ Label Insight. Other solution providers could have similar displays or could have similar different experience for the displays. So each solution partner will use their own data refining tools to extract the data from the labels needed to meet the required data attributes for the branded food playlist. It is also the same tool that would capture the microbe information if you have that on your packaging label flat. To submit to manufacturers can do images or PDF artwork of all their images. Other ways, the methods of how this could be submitted is either directly through an API, which Kyle touched on before earlier, which is kind of recommended overall. There's also a Salsify readiness report. So those folks that are leveraging Salsify or Salsify customers can submit their data that way. And there's also a self-serve platform to upload. Here's just an example of uploading images. So this option here is basically a drag and drop. And to the right there kind of gives you some parameters to follow requirements, which is really around the format. It's a PDF, if it's a JPEG, to make sure it's not over 50 megabytes. Make sure the UPC is visible and that it's high resolution. So if there's any further questions, or if you want to know if your products are being published or not, please feel free to reach out to myself or also Jackie. Both of us are willing to help provide support. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you to all of our presenters today. If our presenters would turn back on their webcams, we have time for a few questions. So the first question we have, and I think this one is for Marshall, if a manufacturer submits label flats to an organization like Label Insight, how is the live microbe data captured?
So basically, in the case of Label Insight, they capture all the data that's actually on the label. So as long as it's sort of distinctly marked on the label, can be somewhat easily identified, they'll capture that information, and then they can be processed and collected through branded foods.
Okay, thank you. And I think this question is for Colin. Are we planning to collect strain-specific identification for the microbes? Isn't that terribly important?
Well, I guess we don't know that yet. It may well be that it's just literally to have your immune system, your nervous system encounter lots of microbes every day may be important, and to allow those almost to discriminate between the type and number of individual microbes that are present. We obviously would want them to be safe. We wouldn't want them to contain any pathogens, but that's, you know, part of food safety anyway. So I think we don't really know. I mean, a lot of probiotics that were developed for one application seem to work in more than one application, which might suggest that the type of microbe is not as important as the number, and that the fact that they are overall that they are safe. But it's a great question, and we really don't know the answer to it yet, I don't think.
Okay, and Kyle, what criteria are used to reject or accept microbe data in foods? Would the rules for acceptance or rejection be the same as in nutrients?
Sure. So I'll go into detail here. Right now, I'll remind everyone that our data submission is voluntary. And because of that, our current requirements are only around required nutrients and some other required information like the description of the food and the ingredient list. So at this time, we do not reject any microbe data being submitted. The microbe data is as submitted for that product by the manufacturer, and we provide that data as submitted on Food Data Central. Though this is a new feature, this is something we have just launched within the last few months, the partnership will continue to evaluate the amount of data coming in on microbe data and can look into the future changing or moving the requirements around microbe data and the data as provided in the data set for the future. But at this time, there are no rejections on microbe data as submitted.
And still for Kyle, since we have you, is there a process in place for manufacturers to review their data before it goes live?
Yeah, data will be reviewed in collaboration with the data provider you're using to submit your data into the GDSN. They can also, manufacturers can work with our data providers that were outlined by Marshall to ensure their data are correct and synced properly with the USDA. And I'll note here, I'll take an opportunity to say that data submitted successfully to us by the first of the month is published before the end of that same month.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Hill, can you give us a sense of the type of products that would fall into high, medium, and low ranges that manufacturers could potentially share and would be present in the database?
Yeah, this is a bit of a dilemma when we were coming up with these categories, because obviously microbes move in jumps of 10 normally. We normally address them in log scale. So what we did was we divided foods into just 3 categories: below 10 to the 4 or 10,000 CFU per gram or per mil, between 10 to the 4 and 10 to the 7, which we called medium, and then above 10 to the 7. But of course, above 10 to the 7 could mean 2 by 10 to the 7, or it could mean 2 by 10 to the 9 or 2 by 10 to the 10, which is factors of hundreds or even thousands. And we did that because there were so many categories of food, and we just wanted to get a very crude estimate of the microbial intake. So, you know, foods that would fall into the above 10 to the 7 would include all fermented foods that are not subjected to a final processing step. Some, I think, of the fruits and vegetables that are unwashed would fall into that category. Then between 10 to the 4 and 10 to the 7 would be most fruits, vegetables, uncooked foods. And then, of course, below 10 to the 4 would be most of the processed foods that are given an intensive heat treatment or are exposed to maybe high pressure or acid or whatever it is that the processing step is. So we only used, as I said, 3 kind of very broad bands. But I think the beauty of getting people to input their information would be we could become much more granular in how many microbes people are actually getting in their diet.
Very interesting. And what about, and this could be for you, Kyle, or for Dr. Hill, what about microbes that are naturally occurring in fruits and vegetables? Would we be able to capture that information in the future, and what research would need to be done?
I think that should be pretty straightforward. You know, there are lots of techniques now for estimating microbial load in foods. Obviously, we relied heavily in the past on plating, but now there are various molecular methods as well for detecting the amount of microbes in food. What can be a little more difficult is foods that are microbes that can be almost in a state of suspended animation, that they're not easy to grow out of the foods. You might have to enrich them in order to get them back to kind of enough health to grow again on an agar plate or something, but nonetheless are alive. So, you know, there's a lot of work could be done to try and find out exactly how many microbes, but I think broad categories will probably get us towards a pretty good answer on whether the consumption of high levels of live microbes in the diet really does play a role in our health.
Okay. Anything to add to that, Kyle?
I was just going to say it's not going to be data that we're collecting within foundation foods, but that's why we have that experimental foods category. This seems very appropriate to have a study in the future that might sort of collect that data, or potentially USDA can work in collaboration with, and we can provide that within the context of how that study was done, and those sort of extra caveats that Dr. Hill was talking about that can sort of be outlined and explained so that the data can be understood.
And when manufacturers share live microbe data, what is that based on? Is it based on the time of manufacture or over the end of the shelf life? Wouldn't the CFUs be constantly changing? Especially if the product is exposed to higher temperatures during distribution and storage.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that with fresh foods and with unprocessed foods or less processed foods could actually move in both directions. The microbial load, of course, could increase over the shelf life of the food. Sometimes that will ultimately lead into spoilage, but it could also be decreasing in foods which started out with a high initial microbial load and are starting to drop off. So those two things would have to be taken into account somehow. For probiotics and foods like that, for example, are foods that, you know, are guaranteeing a certain microbial load, they normally put in more than they need at the start and allow them to kind of die off towards the end of shelf life. But the opposite could happen as well in fresh foods. The microbial load could actually increase over storage time. So that's quite a difficult one to capture. I'd say we will have to, you know, put most foods into kind of bands of live microbes between a certain value and a higher value, rather than just a single value.
Okay, and we have a question for Scott. Scott is also with us from One World Sync, and the question is there a standard for the microbe code in terms of taxonomic level provided by the manufacturer? Will the microbial strain information be available? Scott, you're on mute.
Sorry, I thought I hit that. Apologize. At the moment, we have one attribute identifying the microbe itself. We are working on an additional attribute for the taxonomical strain underneath that microbe. So that's something that will be coming hopefully either later this year or early in the first of the year, depending on the work that's being done. There are some professionals that are looking at that and going through making sure we have the right strains and that type of stuff. So a little bit of time to get that work done, and then we can get it into the standard.
Thank you, Scott. Marshall, I think this is for you. A question has come in. Is there any cost to participate?
So there is no cost to participate to branded foods. Depending on the avenue you choose for a solution provider to put your data in, you know, there may be fees, but actually to publish your data, and if you're already publishing now, it's all free of charge.
Okay, great. And I think that we have one last question or comment about clarification of the estimates of microbes for the NHANES studies that they should include all naturally occurring microbes, not just added fermentation microbes or probiotic microbes. Do you have any thoughts there, Dr. Hill?
No, that's absolutely correct. And, you know, it's the total number of microbes in the food, regardless of whether they were added, whether they were fermentation microbes, or whether they're naturally occurring. It's the total numbers that we should be taking into account.
All right, great. Well, unless you have anything to share, I think that we will move on. We're nearly at the end of our time. And I want to make sure that we understand how, I'm sorry, let me get to my slides. I want to make sure that we have time to let everyone know how to reach out if they have further questions. We will send out in a follow-up email to all attendees a one-pager on how to share your data with the Global Branded Foods Product Database, and it will include contacts to reach out to if you need more information. We also welcome you to join us at IFINS as we connect, collaborate, and catalyze science that matters. With our diverse membership across the entire food and beverage ecosystem, we collectively invite you to join our community to help catalyze a future where science and evidence drives decision-making for all. You can also, I want to thank all of our presenters and all of you for joining us today. Please stay connected with us. You can visit our website, follow us on LinkedIn, and of course, please email us with any additional questions you may have. Thank you all for your time today. Have a great day.